Today, we are wrestling with a specter that still haunts federal agencies, defense contractors, and corporate boardrooms, really all around the globe.
We are diving into the SolarWinds Breach,
Huh.
the digital ghost story that really truly revealed the massive failure of the modern software supply chain.
And if you are looking for a definitive case study on digital paranoia, long-term espionage, and just the utter failure of fundamental trust, this is it.
Yeah,
This wasn't just another hack, it was a systemic compromise, arguably the boldest, most patient supply chain attack ever conducted. Its code names Sunburst, or sometimes you'll hear SolarWinds. They sound dramatic, but they barely capture the scope.
absolutely. Let's unpack this for you. The core of the attack leveraged the inherent trust that is necessary for modern computing.
Right.
A major software vendor, SolarWinds, creates a tool, the Orion Network Management Suite. This tool is designed to monitor and manage your network, which means, by design, it requires deep, privileged access to everything inside your digital walls.
And that trust was fatally weaponized. The compromised, Trojanized Orion update was pushed out to an estimated 18,000 public and private sector entities worldwide.
18,000. That number is it's staggering.
It is. That's the universe of potential victims, and it sets the stage for the unprecedented scale we're dealing with, a total systemic failure of digital distribution integrity.
So our mission today is critical. We need to peel back the layers on this incredibly complex multi-stage methodology. We are going beyond the headlines to understand the untold story of extreme stealth, patience, and operational discipline.
And crucially, why the consequences of this campaign are still very much unfolding even years after the initial discovery.
Exactly. So to set the scene, we have to know who we're fighting, who is behind this.
Well, the US and UK governments formally attributed the campaign to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR.
The SCR.
These are highly sophisticated nation-state actors known in the intelligence community by other monikers like APT-29, Cozy Bear, or the Dukes. Their tradecraft is, absolutely top tier.
And the motivation here is crucial because it dictates the ultimate fallout, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If this had been a ransomware attack, the world would have, it would have exploded financially overnight.
Precisely. This was not about financial gain or destructive sabotage, like we've seen with previous landmark events such as WannaCry or NotPetya, which were designed to destroy data or extort money.
Right.
The SVR's objective was quiet, long-term intelligence gathering, pure espionage. They wanted to steal secrets and policy insights, not burn servers. This distinction, the focus on stealing information rather than destroying systems, significantly influenced why the immediate financial fallout was less catastrophic than it could have been.
Which is a major paradox we're definitely going to analyze later. But the truly terrifying aspect of this deep dive is the hidden scope. Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, testified that what was revealed publicly is only the proverbial tip of the iceberg. The SVR was in thousands of networks for months.
That iceberg analogy is terrifyingly accurate. Consider this. The attacks they identified started on-premise, inside the victim's local network, where the compromised Orion software was installed. Visibility into lateral movement within those local networks is often poor. Visibility, however, becomes much clearer when the adversary moved into cloud services like Office 365, which is highly monitored and logged.
So the detection bias meant we were primarily seeing the cloud breaches. We saw them when they popped their heads up into the cloud, but not what they were doing down below.
Exactly. This implies that customers who hadn't yet migrated their high-value assets to the cloud are far more likely to be continued and undiscovered victims operating entirely in the dark.
Still to this day.
Potentially, yes. The Russian adversary is patient, and the access they gained was deep and fundamental. We cannot assume that every hidden digital window they opened years ago has truly been closed. That long-term persistence is the essential untold story here.
Okay, let's dive into phase one, the patient compromise of the build pipeline. Before the hackers even injected a single line of malicious code, the foundation for this breach was already deeply compromised due to SolarWinds' own internal security shortcomings.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the story shifts from external brilliance to internal failure.
Right.
The security posture at SolarWinds in the lead-up to the breach was frankly indefensible for a company whose software held the digital keys to the federal government and critical infrastructure. It laid the ideal groundwork for the attackers.
So these were documented lapses, not just rumors.
Documented lapses dating back years. We have a pattern of negligence.
What specifically are we talking about here? It sounds like more than just a weak password.
Much more. We know that at the time of the compromise, the company did not employ a Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO.
No CISO for a company of that size with that kind of access.
No CISO, and they didn't even have a senior director of cybersecurity. This is a massive systemic governance failure for a major technology company. It signaled that security was just not a priority at the leadership level.
That structural absence is a vulnerability in itself, especially for a firm whose software has Tier 0 access across global networks. If the highest level of executive leadership isn't focused on security, the entire organization is exposed.
And it gets worse when you look at basic operational hygiene. Reports indicate that cyber criminals had been selling access to SolarWinds infrastructure on dark web forums since at least 2017.
For years.
For years, if third parties are aware of your internal vulnerabilities, you are a ticking time bomb.
And then there's the truly shocking detail about how they treated their own customers regarding antivirus protection.
This one is almost unbelievable. It's a failure of basic hygiene. The company was actually advising customers to disable their antivirus tools before installing SolarWinds software.
Why on earth would they do that?
They claimed these tools interfered with the installation process. But what you're really doing is handing the keys to the kingdom to any potential threat actor. It's inviting trouble right through the front door, no questions asked.
And there was a timely, very explicit warning about perimeter security in late 2019 that should have set off every alarm bell in the building.
Yes, in November 2019, a security researcher reportedly warned SolarWinds that their file transfer protocol, or FTP server, was unsecured.
How unsecured are we talking?
Accessible using the password SolarWinds123.
You're kidding me.
I wish I were. The warning was explicit, that vulnerability meant any hacker could upload malicious files that would then be distributed to customers. Whether the attackers used that exact entry point or simply exploited similar systemic negligence, it signals a massive perimeter weakness that was actively ignored.
So the SVR, likely recognizing this systemic weakness, they established their foothold in the software publishing infrastructure no later than September 2019. This tells us this wasn't a smash and grab. It was a highly patient, meticulous, and long-term operation.
Incredibly patient. The timeline of intrusion is telling. They first deployed a minor, almost throwaway proof-of-concept modification into the code in October 2019 just to test the mechanism.
A test run.
Just a test run. And then, crucially, they spent months from December 2019 to February 2020 doing nothing but setting up their command and control infrastructure. They were embedding themselves, ensuring operational security, and mapping out the victim set before executing the main supply chain attack in March 2020. They were willing to wait half a year just for the optimal window.
Which brings us to the real star of the show, the bespoke, custom-engineered malware that allowed them to poison the well, SUNSPIT. We need to go to detail on this because it's the technical masterstroke.
SUNSPIT, or stellar particles malware as it's sometimes called, is what elevates this from a simple hack to a masterpiece of cyber espionage engineering.
How so?
It wasn't designed to steal data directly. It was specialized to compromise the software development lifecycle, the SDLC. The life cycle refers to the entire process of how a company designs, builds, and distributes software. The SVR targeted the integrity of that process itself.
Explain how it worked using a factory analogy. It sounds like digital perfection, almost like an invisible ghost residing right next to the code.
That's exactly the right analogy. Imagine a legitimate software factory. CNSPO resided exclusively on the SolarWinds Orion platform build servers. Its job was simple. Sit there, constantly monitoring the running processes.
Just watching.
Just watching, specifically looking for the moment the compilation activities began, when the developers ran msbuild.exe to create a new product version. This is the moment the blueprints are turned into the final deliverable product.
So it was waiting for the assembly line to start moving, and only then did it intervene.
Precisely. When the build process started, SUNSPO would spring into action with surgical precision. It temporarily replaced a legitimate source file, specifically inventorymanager.cs, to inject the malicious backdoor code.
A temporary switch.
Right. And this occurred during the compilation of a critical library file called solarwinds.orion.core.businesslayer.dll.
This is the critical, frightening detail. The malware wasn't permanently baked into the source code visible to the developers. It was inserted during the build and then surgically removed afterward.
Correct.
So if a developer looked at the final source code repository, everything would appear clean.
Completely clean. And that's what makes it so perfect for supply chain poisoning. The operational security here was next level. SESU and SBI included hash verification checks, essentially comparing digital fingerprints to ensure the injected code was compatible and wouldn't cause the build to fail or crash.
Because a failed build would obviously alert the developers.
It would set off alarms everywhere, so they made sure it would compile perfectly.
And then came the cleanup. This is the element that makes source code review almost useless in retrospect.
It is the ultimate stealth move. After the signed, compromised product was successfully built and shipped, Sunyuan SPIA removed all traces. It restored the original source code and deleted any temporary files it had created.
Wow.
So the codebase remained clean, preventing detection by internal integrity checks, but the final executable product shipped to 18,000 customers was poisoned. By eliminating any evidence of tampering from the development environment itself, the adversary guaranteed long-term obscurity.
Moving into phase 2, we see how that poison software update, now carrying the Sunburst backdoor, was weaponized, mapping out thousands of victim networks across the globe. The ingenuity shifts from poisoning the well to creating an undetectable sleeper agent inside 18,000 entities.
Right. The primary payload, the Sunburst DLL, was distributed via Trojanized Orion updates released over several months in 2020.
And because it was an official update.
Because the malicious file was digitally signed by SolarWinds, it appeared completely legitimate to every security system and every customer who downloaded it. This is the ultimate weaponization of trust.
And the stealth mechanisms built into this malware were extreme.
Right.
We're talking about an entire operational security checklist before the malware would even activate. They didn't just walk in the front door. They paused outside, checked the locks, checked for cameras, and waited for the perfect moment.
Meticulous is the only word for it. First, there was a mandatory dormant period, randomly selected, but lasting up to 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Why so long?
That intentional pause served a crucial purpose. It was designed to frustrate timeline-based forensic analysis and ensure the implant wasn't discovered during standard short-term internal reviews or sandbox testing. If you only test a new update for a week, you'd never see the malware activate.
So they were hedging their bets, making sure they were only deploying in safe, high-value environments where they wouldn't be caught by automated systems.
Absolutely. The malware included highly obfuscated block lists used to check for the presence of forensic and antivirus tools running as processes or services, things like Wireshark, debuggers, or specific AV products.
He was checking for anyone watching.
Exactly. If security tools were identified, if the environment felt like it was being monitored, the malware would attempt to terminate those agents or suspend itself. It had the ultimate digital self-preservation instinct, prioritizing long-term persistence over immediate execution.
Once active, the malware still needed to call home to the command and control, or C2, servers, but it disguised that activity to blend in with legitimate network noise. How did it do that?
The network traffic communicated via HTTPS, which is standard, but the content itself was disguised as the Orion Improvement Program, or OIP protocol.
Something a network admin would expect to see.
Exactly. They knew network administrators would see the OIP traffic and assume it was routine communication about system performance. Furthermore, it stored its initial reconnaissance data information about the victim's network in legitimate configuration files, hiding in plain sight alongside real SolarWinds data.
And the actual mechanism they used to communicate with the C2 servers was incredibly precise, which is another signature of a highly selective intelligence mission. They didn't want 18,000 beacons lighting up. They only wanted their chosen targets to connect.
This is where the domain generation algorithm, or DGA, comes in. This DGA was a piece of code that constructed specific C2 subdomains of a master address, avsvmcloud.com.
Okay.
Crucially, it constructed these subdomains using a piece of information unique to the victim, their internal domain name.
So if I were running deepdivecorp.com, the malware would try to talk to something like deepdivecorp.avsvmcloud.com.
Exactly. This personalized communication link meant the SVR could precisely identify and control which of the 18,000 victims received the command to proceed to the next, more potent stage of the attack. It was a digital filtering mechanism that guaranteed focus.
This leads us to a critical moment of reflection. If the SVR had access to 18,000 entities, why did they stop? Why the restraint? Wouldn't a nation-state want to maximize its access?
That is perhaps the most defining strategic insight of the entire operation. 18,000 downloaded the compromised software, but that was merely the reconnaissance phase.
Just the first look.
The SVR was highly selective. Investigators estimate only about 100 high-value victims were targeted for secondary exploitation using more potent malware loaders like Teardrop and Raindrop.
Only 100 out of 18,000.
Yes. This confirms that the goal was strictly high-value, deep espionage, not mass disruption or maximizing the victim count, which would have increased the chances of early detection.
Let's look at the victimology because it illustrates a clear strategic intelligence objective focusing intensely on government policy and critical technology.
The targets clearly reflect a state actor seeking geopolitical, economic, and military intelligence. Analyzing the compromised entities, 50% were in information and communications technology.
So they were hunting the blueprints of other tech firms.
Exactly. 18% were direct government entities, and 17% were government contractors. They were targeting the intellectual capital and the levers of power simultaneously.
And the list of confirmed U.S. government targets is staggering, reading like a list of national security nerve centers. It's hard to imagine a higher concentration of sensitive material.
They certainly went after the crown jewels. We know federal agencies, including the Department of Commerce, where NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration's senior leadership emails were breached.
What else?
Parts of the Department of Defense were affected, though the exact extent is still classified. Critically, the Department of Energy and the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration,
The nuclear agency.
including Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratories, were hit.
I remember the reports on the Department of Homeland Security and the Treasury Department being hit. How sensitive were those breaches?
Extremely sensitive. DHS emails were monitored, raising concerns about the security of domestic infrastructure planning. The Treasury breach was particularly alarming. Dozens of senior email accounts in the departmental offices, which handle global economic sanctions policy, were breached.
So they were reading the mail of the people who write sanctions policy against Russia.
They were stealing data directly related to U.S. sanctions policy and intelligence probes information that is hyper-valuable to the SVR, especially concerning Russia's economic and political interests.
In the private sector, we have FireEye, the security firm that ultimately exposed the attack, being hit, and they lost proprietary red team tools.
FireEye's loss was significant because those tools are essentially the ultimate attack playbooks used to test client security. Having those tools allows the adversary to learn the most advanced defensive techniques.
And who else?
Other high-value private targets included chipmaker NVIDIA and, most notably, Microsoft.
Even Microsoft, one of the world's most sophisticated security operations, was breached as a customer of SolarWinds. What did the SVR steal from them?
The investigation confirmed that attackers viewed and, in a few cases, copied subsets of source code from several Microsoft repositories.
The source code.
Now, Microsoft publicly concluded this didn't raise a significant security concern because product security doesn't rely on code secrecy, but the fact remains that the hackers scored blueprints on how to potentially circumvent Microsoft's security measures in future, more sophisticated attacks.
As one analyst worried, this might have been just reconnaissance for the next big operation.
Exactly.
Section 3 brings us to what many analysts consider the most crucial tactical shift exposed by this breach, the focus on identity. The SVR clearly recognized that the old defense strategy of protecting the network perimeter was obsolete. Their focus shifted to the cloud environment.
Correct. The ultimate goal here wasn't stealing data from a server in a backroom. It was stealing the keys that unlock the modern enterprise.
The new crown jewels.
They focused on privileges, digital certificates, tokens, or other keys, what we collectively call identity, from on-premises networks to gain access to cloud services like Office 365, Azure, and Google Workspace. With so much critical data and communication living in the cloud, identity became the new crown jewel for espionage.
And the most complex post-exploitation technique they used to maintain this identity access was known as the golden SAML mechanism. This technique sounds like it completely subverts all existing security assumptions.
It's extremely advanced, requiring a profound understanding of how modern authentication works. The attacker used the compromised on-premises network access to gain control over the organization's identity providers, such as Active Directory Federation Services, or ADFS.
And ADFSs.
ADFS acts as the source of truth for identity. Once they owned that source, they could forge security assertion markup language SAML tokens.
Why is forging a SAML token so devastating? We hear the term, but what does it actually do?
A SAML token is an electronic keycard that proves who you are to any cloud service. When you log in with a password, your identity provider issues a digitally signed SAML token that says, yes, this person is host speaker and they are authorized.
And the cloud provider just trusts it.
The cloud provider just trusts that digital signature. By gaining access to the signing certificate, the attacker could forge these tokens. By forging them, the attacker could impersonate virtually any user, a global administrator, a high-ranking official, and critically, they could bypass multi-factor authentication, MFA, entirely.
Wait a minute. If I have MFA on my account, why would forging a token bypass the step where I have to enter a code from my phone?
Because the authentication process happens in stages. The MFA check happens before the token is issued.
Ah, I see.
If the attacker has the signing certificate, they are essentially short-circuiting that entire process and saying, I am the identity server, and I confirm the user has already successfully authenticated, including their second factor.
And those certificates are long-lived.
Since the SAML token signing certificates are often valid for years and almost never changed outside of a crisis, this technique allowed for maximum undetectable persistence for lengthy periods inside cloud environments.
So even the most stringent security practices, strong passwords, enforced MFA, were rendered irrelevant for cloud access if the attacker attained that golden ticket. It completely undermined fundamental security assumptions.
Exactly. And CrowdStrike's analysis of the threat actor, which they track as stellar particle, showcases a level of operational discipline that made detection incredibly difficult, even in instances where they didn't use golden SAML.
Talk us through some of those advanced TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that show their surgical tradecraft.
One key technique that forensic investigators found fascinating was credential hopping.
Credential hopping.
The threat actor leveraged different stolen credentials for nearly every lateral move they made across the network. If they wanted to jump from server A to server B, they used a unique, often single-use credential for that jump.
So they weren't leaving a clear trail.
This severely obscures their presence and makes it nearly impossible for forensic teams to track them as a single continuous entity across the network because every log entry looks like a different person.
They intentionally fractured their own movement pattern to hide, raising the cost of detection exponentially for defenders. What about stealing the keys and blueprints?
They employed sophisticated credential theft methods. They utilized DC sync, which allows an attacker to mimic a domain controller and request password hashes directly, essentially stealing the entire Active Directory database without setting off typical password change alarms.
And they also used tools like Mimikatz.
They also used in-memory execution of Mimikatz to dump credentials from memory. These are standard high-end tools, but they applied them with extreme care and limited execution, again, prioritizing stealth.
There was a shocking story about them essentially piggybacking on existing user sessions to scoop up personal data.
That's right. And it demonstrates both patience and a willingness to get down into the details. In some instances, the threat actor connected via remote desktop protocol, RDP, using a legitimate user's account to hijack their existing Windows session.
So they're literally sitting in the user's chair, digitally speaking.
Once inside that user's environment, they would be able to operate as the user. They could then export all saved passwords from the user's Chrome browser into plaintext CSV files, focusing on sensitive websites, administrative tools, and customer lists.
And their cleanup after this was the definition of surgical stealth, wasn't it?
Absolutely. After stealing the valuable data, the list of saved passwords, they navigated to the user's Chrome history page and deleted only the specific history items related to their activity.
So it's their own tracks.
Right, the file transfer, the export process, the sensitive logins. They left the rest of the history intact, meaning the victim user would return to their computer and see a mostly normal browser history with no immediate red flags.
They also weaponized the inherent shift to the cloud using built-in administration features rather than external malware.
That's a key cloud-native technique. They manipulated O365 service principles. A service principal is essentially a non-human identity used by applications to access resources.
Like an app's user account.
Exactly. They targeted services like Microsoft Staff Hub and abused the high-privilege application impersonation role. This role, when assigned to an attacker-controlled user, grants broad, powerful access to read all mail, SharePoint, and OneDrive files across the entire organization.
And those service principal sign-ins often bypass the MFA checks that regular user accounts had because conditional access policies hadn't yet been designed to rigorously cover these automated identities.
Exactly. This combination of stealth, credential hopping, targeted theft, golden SAML, and cloud account abuse demonstrated a multi-vector campaign leveraging up to a dozen different entry points, showcasing truly exceptional operational discipline. They were not reliant on a single weakness.
Yet despite all this sophistication, this high-level nation-state operation deploying custom malware like Sunspot may have initially gained access through basic rudimentary security failures.
That is the ultimate humbling irony for the entire security industry and the core paradox of this breach.
It's almost hard to believe.
While the technical execution once inside was world-class, truly the work of digital intelligence nerds, Artisan's reports suggest the initial entry into SolarWinds' internal systems may have been facilitated by something as simple as easy-to-guess privileged passwords or an unsecured FTP server.
Like SolarWinds 123.
It highlights that the most sophisticated attack still only needs one basic human or operational failure to succeed. The chain is only as strong as its weakest, most human link.
Given the sheer scale of the compromise, infecting 18,000 entities and targeting dozens of federal agencies, the response was equally massive. Let's look at the systemic efforts for remediation and response, starting with the critical issue of silence and accountability.
Right. Brad Smith's testimony following the incident brought the issue of transparency to the forefront. He emphasized that opacity was a major problem. Too many victims, particularly in the private sector, were keeping information about their breach to themselves, hindering a collective defense effort.
So the victims were incentivized to keep quiet, to protect their stock price or reputation, even if it meant their peers couldn't defend themselves against the same attacker.
Precisely. Smith stressed that we cannot solve this problem through silence, and the immediate need was for a clear, consistent reporting obligation on the private sector. The lack of mandatory information sharing meant the SVR had a massive, unexploited intelligence advantage.
The government's reaction was swift and radical, manifesting in CISO's, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's Emergency Directive 21001. This essentially treated the entire federal network as potentially toxic and completely compromised.
It was an immediate, uncompromising assume compromise order for all federal agencies. Agencies were mandated to block all external traffic to and from Orion hosts immediately, no questions asked.
A total quarantine.
A massive, instantaneous infrastructure shift. Furthermore, they had to forensically image system memory and analyze logs for indicators of compromise, such as the specific file hash associated with the compromised DLL, B91sec2fe 410296955 BF20794684448.
Let's pause on that forensic imaging. For a layperson, what does forensically image system memory mean in the context of cleaning up after sunburst?
It means agencies had to take a snapshot of the computer's RAM at that moment. Since Sunburst and its follow-on payloads like Teardrop often execute in memory without ever writing to the disk, the only way to find them is to capture the volatile data in the system memory before it disappears.
The digital equivalent of catching a ghost.
Exactly. That imaging and analysis requirement was a huge technical undertaking, underscoring the severity of the threat.
And the overall cleanup process required an almost complete digital reset across government systems.
It was a digital scorched earth policy. The directive mandated that agencies treat all hosts monitored by the SolarWinds Orion software as compromised, assume that further persistence mechanisms had been deployed, rebuild those systems from trusted, pristine sources, and most crucially, reset all credentials used by or stored in the software.
That must have been incredibly disruptive.
Painful, but necessary. Given the SVR's focus on identity and tokens, that credential reset was perhaps the most critical step.
And this directive uncovered deeper issues within the federal networks themselves, forcing an embarrassing self-examination that went beyond SolarWinds.
It did. CISO observed troubling conditions in federal networks, not just one agency, but across the board. Basic cyber hygiene like multi-factor authentication and the principle of least privileged access were simply not consistently implemented.
So the attack exposed pre-existing conditions.
It served as a potent, expensive reminder that even the most cutting-edge, expensive defensive technology fails if the basics are ignored, especially around identity protection.
Turning to SolarWinds itself, the company embarked on a massive corporate overhaul to try and restore digital trust, realizing that their reputation was decimated.
Under new leadership, they launched the Secure by Design program in January 2021. This wasn't just patching vulnerabilities. It was a fundamental, multi-year effort to establish a new, gold-plated security standard, moving philosophically beyond zero trust, which means trust nothing, to an assume breach mindset.
What does that assume breach mindset practically entail, especially for a software developer?
It means designing systems with the explicit recognition that the perimeter will be penetrated. You design for detection and containment, not just prevention.
You plan for failure.
You plan for failure. It requires constantly identifying and addressing gaps in detection, prevention, response, and recovery. For SolarWinds, this meant adopting stronger endpoint protection, dramatically expanding just-in-time access for engineers, and designating special red teams to constantly test their internal systems, assuming the SVR is still watching.
And the technical solution, designed to prevent future SUSNS-PIOT-style attacks, sounds like a revolutionary shift in how software is developed, designed to eliminate the possibility of that invisible compromise during the build process.
It is the architectural answer to the SNSP threat. The technical response was the implementation of a next-generation build system centered on a parallel build process.
Parallel build.
Instead of building software in one single centralized environment, which creates a single point of failure, they now develop it in multiple, secure, duplicate, and most importantly, ephemeral environments.
Ephemeral, meaning they disappear entirely after the product is built. Can you give us an analogy to grasp how transformative this is?
Imagine building a car on 5 separate, redundant assembly lines, all running at the same time. Crucially, as soon as the car is finished, all 5 assembly lines are completely destroyed, wiped clean, rebuilt from scratch, and given new, unique credentials for the next product.
So an attacker can't just camp out in one build server.
An attacker would have to successfully compromise all 5 parallel redundant environments simultaneously and inject Soyuz Untot into 5 places at the exact same time during the compile window.
That makes the attack exponentially harder and financially demanding for any adversary, including the SVR.
Exactly. It raises the cost of attacks so high that only the most dedicated, well-funded nation-states might even attempt it, and their chance of success is dramatically reduced. This new system represents the industry standard for supply chain security today.
Beyond the technical fixes, the SolarWinds breach forced a reckoning in geopolitics, corporate accountability, and regulation. Let's start with the geopolitical signal sent by the official attribution.
The official attribution to the SVR by the US and UK was a necessary diplomatic signal, but it immediately sparked an intense debate over international law.
So.
Since the activity was categorized strictly as quiet intelligence gathering, or espionage, and showed no physical damage or destruction, some analysts suggest it may not technically violate current international law.
Why not? If they penetrated the Department of Defense and the NNSA, surely that qualifies as an attack.
The current legal framework is very thin regarding purely espionage-focused cyber activities. Many analysts cite the principle of tu quoque, which translates roughly to you also.
Meaning you do it too.
Exactly. Since the U.S. and its allies also engage in robust digital espionage, they are cautious about setting a precedent that criminalizes all cyber intelligence operations. The absence of physical destruction or economic paralysis limits the grounds for conventional kinetic retaliation.
So, because the activity was intelligence gathering, the U.S.'s response was limited to sanctions rather than military action.
That's the complex nuance. The U.S. Department of Defense's own policy views suggest espionage in and of itself is generally not a violation of international law in peacetime. This limits the grounds for a conventional military response, though the U.S. still imposed sanctions targeting specific individuals and entities associated with the SVR.
And the European response was even more cautious, highlighting the lack of international consensus.
The EU expressed solidarity with the U.S. on the impact of the malicious activities and the need for stability, but they were notably careful not to explicitly condemn the act of espionage itself.
So they condemned the result, but not the method.
In a way, yes. This signals a slower, more cautious response than the aggressive U.S. sanctions, illustrating the immense difficulty of achieving international consensus on what constitutes a red line in cyberspace when the activity is purely intelligence-focused and non-destructive.
Perhaps the most profound shift, though, came in corporate accountability, driven by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. This is where security risks met financial governance.
This is a major legal legacy that fundamentally changed how CISOs and corporate boards operate. In October 2023, the SEC filed charges against SolarWinds and its Chief Information Security Officer, Timothy G. Brown.
On what grounds?
They alleged fraud and the concealment of critical security deficiencies from investors going all the way back to 2018, years before the breach was discovered.
That is a staggering implication. The SEC, traditionally focused on financial disclosures, was tying inadequate cybersecurity practices directly to corporate financial disclosure violations.
It marked the first time the SEC brought enforcement claims against a CISO personally. The SEC alleged that Brown and the company misled investors by repeatedly overstating their cybersecurity posture in public filings, while internal communications documented severe known vulnerabilities.
So they knew they had problems but didn't disclose them.
The claim was that they failed to accurately reflect internal risks in investor disclosures.
What was the outcome for the CISO?
While the charges against Timothy G. Brown were later dismissed by the SEC, the action itself established a critical precedent. Corporate officers are now acutely accountable for ensuring internal risks are accurately reflected in investor disclosures.
So the warning shot has been fired.
The legal groundwork has been laid. It permanently linked security posture directly to corporate governance and executive liability. CISOs are no longer just responsible for technology, they are responsible for truthfulness to investors.
The incident also created a massive regulatory legacy in the U.S. with Executive Order 13028.
The 2021 executive order was a direct, sweeping response to the failings exposed by SolarWinds. It mandated baseline security standards for software sold to the federal government, requiring developers to maintain greater visibility into their software development processes, specifically to prevent future supply chain compromises.
And it spurred the creation of new institutions and tools to prevent future failures.
Yes, it created the Cybersecurity Safety Review Board, which is intentionally modeled after the NTSB, the body that investigates airplane crashes, to analyze significant cyber incidents and make non-binding recommendations.
It's like a crash investigation for hacks.
Exactly. It also established a standardized playbook for federal incident response and critically fueled the massive governmental and industry movement for software bills of materials, or SBOMs.
Why are SBOMs so important here? Why are they the immediate practical solution for the next supply chain attack?
Because it took security teams weeks to find the corrupted version of Orion within their networks after the breach was publicly disclosed. Unacceptable. SBOMs are essentially mandatory lists of all components, commercial or open source, in a piece of software. If an obscure library is poisoned tomorrow, an SBOM allows a defender to immediately search their environment and find every piece of software running that component.
It reduces the search time?
The goal is to reduce that unacceptable response time from weeks to hours, giving defenders critical visibility into what they are running so they can react faster when a supply chain component is poisoned.
Finally, let's revisit the financial paradox. We noted earlier that the insured losses were surprisingly low for such a systemic breach.
They were. The estimated insured losses were only about $90 million, covering forensic and incident response services for insured companies.
Which, for a global catastrophe, is not a huge number.
Right. And this figure is low, precisely because the SVR's attackers were focused strictly on espionage and intelligence gathering, not widespread destruction or ransom. They minimized the collateral economic damage, prioritizing their long-term, quiet access.
But the incident revealed a profound structural risk to the cyber insurance market itself.
It did. The industry recognized that if the SVR had chosen to pivot to a destructive attack, which they clearly had the capability to do across 18,000 entities, the financial impact would have easily exceeded the catastrophic threshold, likely crossing $500 million.
Or more.
Much more. The SolarWinds breach forced cyber insurers to rigorously reassess third- and fourth-party supply chain risk and potential systemic losses, recognizing the true scale of what they were insuring against. A single, compromised piece of trusted software could take down global infrastructure.
What a journey through a campaign of unparalleled stealth and meticulous tradecraft. The SolarWinds deep dive confirms a few foundational lessons. Security must now prioritize identity protection above all else. We must operate with an assume breach mindset, and there is a high, non-marginal cost of resilience required to defend against nation-state supply chain threats.
And that cost is worth it because the threat remains. SolarWinds was a masterclass in modularity and persistence. The SVR was exceptionally sophisticated, leveraging perhaps up to a dozen different vectors for entry and persistence. Not just the single sunburst backdoor. They are still considered one of the most capable actors operating today.
We've seen the industry respond by rebuilding the integrity of the digital signature process, implementing new secure by design standards, and adopting things like those parallel ephemeral build environments.
Yes, those steps address the known attack vectors and raise the defensive standards significantly. But for you, the listener, the knowledge gained today raises this essential, lingering question, the truly untold story of this operation. Given the stealth, patience, and operational discipline of the SVR, who were in thousands of corporate and government networks for months, prioritizing persistence over detection, Are we truly certain that every single hidden digital window they opened years ago has, even today, been closed? The espionage mission never truly ends, and neither does the need for extreme vigilance.
A chilling and necessary thought to end on. Thanks for guiding us through this unprecedented deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.